Hi, this is Paul Berkoven with Elk Spring Education, your source for financial and real estate know-how. And today we're doing a tidbit on the home buying process. And today we're going to talk a little bit about renting versus owning and when it's smart to do each. And sometimes when people get confused about picking the right course, some of the things that get in the way. So this is a pretty cool tidbit here. So one of the key things to know is that if you look at this diagram of ownership versus renting and think about this as time going by, basically, and think about this as cost. Basically, in the short run, it costs more to own, okay, higher cost to own, but as time goes by, it costs way more to rent than it does to own. And a lot of people maybe know that, but it's important to think about why and understand what that's about. So the main reason that it costs more to own up front than rent is that when you buy a property, there's closing costs. And the closing costs can be substantial depending on the property and the location and so on and so forth. When you rent, maybe the only cash flow item you have is a 1 month security deposit, right? So it's a very different amount of cash required to get into a property. And the other thing to keep in mind is that when you own, it's the closing costs on the way in, but you also have to think about them on the way out, right? If you're really looking at it as an investment, you got to think, look, I'm going to pay some cost to get into this home, but if I want to sell it, I'm going to have closing costs to get out of it. So if you package all that together and look at the cost of ownership, it's a lot more than renting in the short term. However, as time goes by, right, the cost of ownership goes way down, whereas the cost of renting goes way up. Why is that? Well, the primary reason that the cost of ownership goes down is because of appreciation, right? So properties in an economy where there's inflation, even a small amount of inflation, real property like real estate will tend to appreciate over time. You know, not in a straight line. There could be down years. We certainly saw after the crash in the U.S. that there were markets where things depreciated for a while. But if you look at the long-term trend, those things, even properties in those areas, have appreciated over time in most cases. So the point is that over time, as long as there's inflation in an economy, real estate will appreciate as time goes by. You know, and I think about my parents who bought their first home outside of New York City. It was a first-time buyer home there. And, you know, that was like $19,000 house. They had to borrow some money from their parents because they couldn't quite afford the down payment. And wow, 19 grand was a lot of money for a house, you know. So now that thing sells for about $600,000, right? And that's the effect of time and appreciation, you know. So when you own, you get the appreciation lift. The other reason that renting costs more over time is not just that you miss out on the appreciation, but also it is very rare for a landlord to call you up and be like, hey, I so appreciate you being my tenant. You know, you paid on time. You know, it's just been going so good. You know, next year, let's make your rent lower, right? It just doesn't usually work that way. Usually it's the opposite. So in general, these two things cross at some point. And if you're going to be in an area for a period of time that is longer than where these lines cross, in general, it makes sense to own from a financial perspective, right? You're going to make money doing that if you own a property for longer than it takes to make up for the cost of acquisition and sale. So basically, just thinking about this diagram, there's a couple things to say. One is that nobody knows the exact point in time when these things are going to cross. It's predicting the future, which we can't really do. However, your buyer's agent is a huge resource in getting a pretty good idea of what this is. Your buyer's agent is an expert in the market where you're looking. Your buyer's agent is somebody who studies this, who knows the trends, who knows the history, and can give you a pretty good idea of what appreciation rates have been and your opinion of what they think they'll be, but it's an educated opinion, right? So you really want to focus on finding a buyer's agent who's an expert in the area where you want to own a home, and then trusting that professional for their advice in looking at when they think these lines would cross, given the property that you're interested in. So knowing all of that, there are some times that you could think about, gee, I might be smarter to rent than own, right? So even if rates are low, even if there's a great deal on a property, there's still times where it might make more sense to rent than own. And 3 of those times are obviously the length of time that you plan to own a home. For example, if you're like, I'm going to be here for a year, and it's just not that far down the timeline, that's a possible reason not to own. There's a couple other times though too. One is sometimes with an uncertain income future or job future, I could say even. I just started my first business and I know it's going to go great, right? That might be a time to rent and see. If it doesn't work, I'm going to have to move. Maybe it's better to rent, right? Uncertain income or job future would be one. And sometimes there's also the debt load. If debt load's high, you could say, it's better to rent for a while first and get debt under control. What I would say about that is you want to, no matter what, not drop your marker. And secondly, you want to talk to a financial professional about that before making that decision. So a great lender, a great financial advisor can help with that. Sometimes debt can be repackaged in ways that are smart when you're owning a home, and actually home ownership can help with debt management. But there are other times where it's smarter not to have it. And for example, if the amount of debt puts you into a precarious position financially with a mortgage, then that could force you to have to sell sooner if things didn't work out so well, and could be a bit of a challenge there too. So financialpro.info. So financialpro.info. I want to, when we're finished, just ask you to take a couple quick moments to do 2 quick feedback questions on our tidbit today. Really just take a second, and there's a couple of things that you can request there. If you need help, finding a good realtor or a good lender for the area where you are, feel free to note that there, and we'll help you with some recommendations for folks you could talk to and interview. So anyway, that's the basic concept of what we're doing, looking at ownership versus renting and some ideas around it. Now, as I said a moment ago, in general, if you're going to be in an area for a period of time, the sooner you own a home, the better. Like if you're going to be in an area long enough, right, the sooner you own, the better, because you get to start taking part in the appreciation. There are a lot of people who want to own who get stuck though and don't. They might delay it for a while. They might not do it as soon as they could because they don't know they can, or more frequently, they perceive obstacles to ownership that are really myths. And one of the things I've watched with the most successful buyers is they're good at sorting out what really is an obstacle and what's a myth. And part of what fuels that is motivation. Like the more motivated you are to figure that out, the greater your chances. And that's not even about whether you decide to own a home. It can even be obstacles versus myths around how much you spend, around what type of home you get, around all sorts of parts of that decision making. So a lot of what you want to do is use your motivation to be very, very clear about figuring out what's an obstacle versus what's a perceived obstacle or a myth. So for example, one thing that people get hung up on all the time is the amount of money it takes to own a home. People are like, I got to save 20% down or half 20% down to own a house. It's just not true. Fake news, complete fake news, right? So there are programs with zero down. There's ways of putting low money down without paying PMI. There's all kinds of stuff. And a great lender will help you. Finding a great consulting lender is huge before you get too far in decision making to figure out what's an obstacle versus a myth, right? So one of the best things you can do is find a great consulting lender to help you understand what the options really are. And especially around cash needed, there's a lot of options out there that are important to understand. Even if you have assets, sometimes it's smarter to hang on to them or use them for other purposes. So consulting lender is super important. Things that motivate people sometimes are the inflation rate or the appreciation rate. That could motivate you to want to get into a home or to get out of rent if it keeps going up every year. The tax savings of home ownership is a great motivator. You could pay less in taxes if you own a home, which helps you actually have a better lifestyle. You might be able to afford something better than you could rent, for the same monthly payment. Alternate investment rate is a great place where people often need to sort out obstacle versus myth. So if you have assets, where's the smartest place to put them? And again, this is something that a great consulting lender, a great consulting realtor, and a great consulting financial advisor, financial planner can help with. Monthly payment, a lot of folks get stuck around that thinking, okay, my budget is this no matter what. And what we see a lot of times is that by working with professionals who are good in these things, especially the lender and maybe the financial advisor too, there are ways that the budget can be a lot better than you might think, because most of us see our budget through the lens of our current reality, and not so much through what is possible, because we don't know what's possible, right? So busting obstacles from myths is really important. And I think the main thing to remember with that is that ultimately you're pursuing lifestyle goals and financial goals in a homeownership decision, those two things. And so really researching both of those out is super important before you decide if something is an obstacle or if it's actually a perceived obstacle. So financialpro.info. Please just take a couple moments, just take only that for 2 quick feedback questions, and request anything that you'd like, including help finding consulting lender, consulting realtor, financial advisors if you need that, and financialpro.info. Thank you.